The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to our monthly webinar. We're so excited to have Tatiana Kolovu present on communicating your personal brand and building your network. Tatiana started her professional journey as a health educator and became an organizational development trainer, public speaker, university professor, and executive communication coach. She's a faculty member for the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University and a co-owner of Ethos Fitness, a boutique fitness studio in Bloomington, Indiana. Tatiana is an ACSM certified exercise physiologist and a veteran master trainer for Schwinn Cycling. By the end of this session, you'll learn 5 tips to connect better to clients, how to identify your key audiences, and how to stand out in the fitness space. Please type in your questions in the chat bar and we'll respond to them at the end of the webinar. Without further introduction, Tatiana, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Francis. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk about this topic. It's so crucially important. And I've done quite a lot of work. I teach this in my university courses. In fact, I've got a PowerPoint that's mostly visual because, as one of the important things I'll talk about here today, is the visual part is the most important. The vocal, how you sound when you communicate, and actually the words that you say or the verbal of the message that you're sending to. Now, like all of you, I have spent the last 2 years mostly communicating virtually, mostly being in front of a camera, and that does affect your credibility, or that does influence how you come across, what today I'll call your presence. Your presence is critical, and it influences the first impression that you give an audience. Francis, will I get my visuals here, or should I walk through it? So, in communicating, thank you so much, by the way. In communicating your personal brand, as Francis mentioned just earlier, I'm wearing 2 hats. One as a university faculty professor, teaching students, MBAs, undergrads, executives, how to enhance their brand and how to enhance their presence as they're sharing and as they're speaking. But I also, as Francis said, I have 1 foot deeply embedded in the fitness industry. The fitness industry that I've worked with for over 35 years. This is a fun fact. During COVID, we put a turf in the back of our studio and we held most of our courses, of our classes outdoors. I could do a whole other presentation on resilience and making it through, but I would have to say, check out Ethos Fitness on social media. I do the social media. But we survived it, and I'm very thankful for that. But as I designed this content, I'm thinking of you. I'm thinking of you as certified ACSM professionals, fitness practitioners, personal trainers, group fitness instructors. And you see there on the top and left bottom signs I have going to the ACSM Health Fitness Summit, or for the ones of you who are scientists, and you may go to a meeting and someone says, tell me a little bit about your research. That is the question, or tell me a little bit about you, I want us to focus on in these next 35 minutes. And we'll leave the rest open for you for questions. Whether you're talking to a potential employer, whether you are meeting a team or you're going with a team to a conference, or whether you're networking, and whether you're talking to a potential client or a current client, that perception of persuading or influencing with your credibility is everything. The quality of power of inspiring belief, inspiring the other person that I know what I'm talking about. Francis and I in the green room earlier, we're talking about all the crazy things that are happening in our industry. I don't know about you, but I do have TikTok. I look at it a lot, and I think this is where the youngest generation of educators are learning. It's a little bit crazy, and there's a lot of show factor. But be true and understand that our consumers will come back to this. Do they believe that what you're saying is true, it's real, it's honest, it's authentic? And a lot of that comes across in the impression that you make. So today, I'll talk about brand and personal brand and presence interchangeably. I want you to think of this is your product. What you're selling, you have to persuade that you know what you're talking about. So your client will sign with you. They will come into the doors of your fitness facility. They will hire you. They will want you to be part of their scientific team and stance. So I want you to think of it a little bit as a magical power, sort of a magical cloak of influence here. Now, I have a whole course on LinkedIn Learning for the ones of you that may be on it. And if you can't get on it, become my friend on LinkedIn and I can open it for you. But if you're a university student, most universities have access to that. And the story comes from the question you may get when someone says, tell me a little bit about you. It's a true story. I helped one of my MBA students actually work through that process, and I reenacted it in this course called Designing an Authentic Elevator Pitch, because when someone says, tell me a little bit about you, that's your elevator pitch. So this is an actual actor, but we replayed it all from the beginning. And here's the story. This specific student was in operations and had 7 to 8 years of experience, but he really wanted to work for an agricultural company, one of the John Deere's, one of the companies that makes big equipment pieces and really helps cultivate land and change landscapes in different parts of the Midwest. So he came to me and he said, I'm not really hitting it with my influence in those get to know you sessions, sort of the tell me a little bit about you. And I said to him, what's one thing that stands out for you? Tell me, why are you so involved or interested in agriculture? And he said, you know, I grew up in the summers on my grandpa's lap on the tractor. And I said, stop right here. We're going to build this story. And that's the one that we reenacted right in this training course in LinkedIn, around him talking about grandpa's tractor and what he remembered, because nobody can replicate that. And I encourage you all here today to think about, what is your story? How can you bring your authentic self? And how can you think about when someone says, tell me a little bit about you, that you don't start rambling and saying, at the age of 5, you can say, I was first attracted to this industry because. I have that personal story. I had a very major back fusion surgery when I was 12. And the doctor said to me, we're sorry to say, you'll be active in your life, but you're never going to be athletic or very active. And I am pretty strong-willed. I sat in that doctor's office and I just said, just watch me. And exercise has been transformational for me. That's kind of what I lead with when people say, why do all this crazy stuff? Why exercise and why now? So in a way, presence, it's your personal brand, it's your competence. You have to know your stuff. And you're in an ACSM webinar, I'm sure you know your stuff and you know where to find good information. But it's also warmth, because that's the one way that people initially think, I like you, I trust you, I want to hear more from you. It's our ability to deliver compelling and memorable messages. So remember, if I tell you that I got into the industry and exercise is transformational for me because of my story with my back surgery and so on, you'll remember that a lot better than saying, I have a degree in exercise science, I went to Indiana University, blah, blah, blah. Everyone can do that. Your ability to read an audience, we'll talk a little bit about that. It's important because with every audience, you have to, in a way, not change your story, but you have to approach it in a different way because there's a so what for them. And finally, be very audience relevant with your body language and with what it is that you're saying, sort of being responding to what it is that your audience needs, if you're virtual or if you're in person. This is a very old study by UCLA psychologist Albert Moravian, and you may have seen it 100 times, but a meaning of a message comes across mostly with nonverbals. That's why we'll talk about visual as far as what you look like. Tone or vocals, 38% of your message and your energy comes across in that, and only 7% of the words that you say. Now, I'll argue with this because when you get too complicated, you lose people. It's really important to think of what you look like. Later on in this webinar, I'll give you resources where you can go in and practice your 2-minute pitch, your elevator pitch, and the artificial intelligence in all of these tools gives you feedback on how authentic you sound, how inclusive your language is, how many M's and A's you have, how good is your eye contact. Now, as I say all this, one thing that goes completely away on the phone, and a lot of us do work on the phone, is it splits up into vocals or intonation and verbals. And that's an 80-20 split. And that's why we say, and that's why right now I am standing because I'm more energetic and I can project, I can stand a lot more when I'm standing on camera, or why I encourage a lot of my clients that I coach to stand when they speak on the phone, or even better, to look in a mirror when they speak. Because when you look in the mirror and you see your face, most humans tend to have a positive response. So let's break this up in just a little bit into pieces. By the way, Francis, I do have animation, I see. Getting started with presence is how you walk in the room. Do you walk like a boss? Look at this little kitty cat going. We know, not a very good boss in the office example, but what is the energy you bring into the room, even when you are joining a meeting, or maybe you're meeting with a client, or maybe you're entering a room at a conference and there's a committee meeting like many of us at ACSM attend. The very first thing to think about is posture, and I talked about this. We're all in the world of coaching and training around what our body can operate and do. But if there is one nonverbal, there's a second one that's important, but the very first one is posture. So what I want you to do right now, if you're looking at me, here's a little posture check. I learned this from physical therapist Deborah Ellison many years ago, and I still use it. Put your fingers on your lips, and I want you to just rest your fingers where they are and let your fingers touch your lips. Now, I want you to leave your fingers where they are, and I want you to retract your chin to the point where it's not uncomfortable and tugging, but where you are relaxed and your shoulders are lined up with your ears. Now, I want you to look at the difference. This is where we hang most of the day, and this is where we should be. We all coach neutral spine, and we all coach good posture, but do we do it? And when we're introducing ourselves to someone who is important, do we mind our posture? You can see the difference here. A person here that I'm showing you in the picture is relaxed, but she's also leaning in a little bit. Even if you're just stepping in a little bit or saying really, and you're making good eye contact, that posture will accentuate itself. So when you introduce yourself, posture is key. You've all seen on the left here, you see Amy Cuddy and the research. Some of it could be controversial, but in her TED Talk, she talks about power posing to get energy. But one of my colleagues, Carol Kinzer-Ginman, she also has LinkedIn learning courses, excellent ones. She talks in her book, Stand Out, an Ohio State University study found that people who sat up straight were more likely to believe what they wrote down concerning their qualifications for a job instead or compared to the ones that didn't have good posture. I know all the scientists in this call are going to be, what was the statistical significance of the survey? Did they do an ANOVA test? What was their end? Just trust me. Your body tells you if you are more confident when you stand up straight. And this is so critical and important. And it's important to get some feedback. So here you can see that we now even have devices. I'm not kidding you. I pulled this off the internet. Posture is so important, not in your everyday life only, but in how you come across. I don't want you to bring up that man bra that I see there, but those little things that people put behind their necks to remind them to stand up. Oh my goodness, can we train people physically to do that? And for all of us, we need to remember that posture plays a really, really important role in how we come across in the image that we give. So when we are sitting in webinars like this one, it's also really important to look like we're not falling asleep. And it's awfully exhausting. I know so many times I feel like sometimes I'm looking at a group and the internet has gone down because they're not flinching or moving, or they're slouching or where they are. Again, little hint, stand, especially if you are presenting. So it's also important in the virtual setting as well. So posture is one specific piece, but eye contact is the second and most important one. We are all distracted by these little guys, right? I've got a Be Real reminder. Do any of you do Be Real? I love it. My daughter got me involved in it. By the way, she's my only friend I share it with, but it's an app where it tells you to take a picture of whatever you're doing, and you do a selfie, and then you can see sort of what the person getting it can see what you see. Talk about authenticity. There's nothing better than that, because you cannot curate any of the image or how you look. You have to take it. So I had a reminder, and probably at the end of the webinar, you'll have Francis, you'll have to humor me so I can do a Be Real with you. But eye contact is critical, and it's critical that when we are communicating and networking with someone, we don't have that phone in our hand as we move the room. Leave it in your hotel room, leave it in your car, leave it in your bag, and don't use it as a way to break eye contact. Now, the second picture up there is this young woman thinking, and many of us break eye contact. In fact, sometimes it may be best that we don't have direct eye contact all of the time. Not everyone is comfortable with that. Not all cultures communicate eagerness and outgoingness and positivity with eye contact all the time. Another reason I would ask you to break eye contact if we're on a call and you're communicating something difficult, I always quite often just bring a visible notebook where I'm taking notes, and that way I have a good reason to break eye contact with them too. So eye contact is important, and I can't, because I know this is a scientific group or a group that looks at research. They've even tested this at Cornell University, looking at two different tricks cereal boxes. So they took subjects in the kitchen table and they said, which one of the two do you like to look at? This is not a human, but people said the one on the right that makes direct eye contact with me at my breakfast table. Isn't that crazy? So it's really critical. It's really important. Mind you, I know we're talking about face-to-face, but it's also important to think about virtual and having cameras on. That's really critical too. All right, moving from posture to eye contact to facial expressions. Politicians and business people get in trouble all of the time with their facial expressions. I'm not going very positive or negative ones too. And of course, the cameras are on the whole time. But what our face looks like when we speak, you may ask yourselves now, how can this Greek be so animated? I know I am, and at times I have to tone it down. But it's also important when we listen, that we look and our communication comes across, that we're attentive and we're paying eye contact, having good eye contact. But how we communicate those facial expressions are important. And that's why one of my tips for people when they're on the phone is to look in a mirror. So they don't say, it's very nice to meet you. When you look in the mirror, most humans tend to smile. And it's important to say, it's very nice to meet you. When you smile, that smile comes across in your voice. Posture, eye contact, facial expressions. If you've seen this video, it's the I don't know what to do with my hands video. It's never ending question. What do I do with my hands when I present? And I say certain things when I present in front of people, right? I teach business presentations. Avoid spider in the mirror, the fig leaf, the basketball hold or the basket hold. We do this too. It's when our elbows are Velcroed to our ribs. We talked about the at ease where people look super stiff, and then the T-Rex. And I would say at conferences, I'm sure that when we're meeting someone, we tend to hold our phone and then we're holding our drink and things are locked up. Remember, your hands are your exclamation marks for your remarks. I don't want you parking the plane, but it's important that you don't lock them up and you don't hold them closed. That you want to keep a good posture with an open hand position. What's the best way to stand? Just put your hands by your sides. If you're presenting, show your palms. That shows openness and trustworthiness. If you're just talking to someone, you can shift around and move, but not do it all the time, and try not to block off or lock your hands too much. So again, I review. We talk about posture, good and strong eye contact, relevant to the audience. We talk about facial expressions and gestures specifically too. One of the pieces that's also really important here, what not to do with your hands. One of the things that I'll talk a little bit about is not being too animated, but a lot of people like our Indiana University famous bad boy alum, sorry, I have to ignore something here. We can be very animated, and this is part of his personal brand specifically too. He's kind of out there and he expresses his emotion too. And we love him for that as well too. One last thing that I'll talk about in the nonverbals is something that I learned quite early in my undergraduate education. My first degree is in exercise science from Indiana University, Bloomington. Let me make sure that my slide moves here. And one of the best teachers that I had, oh no, I don't want to miss that slide. I was going to talk about artifacts as they relate to what's around you, what are you holding, what are you wearing. But the best story comes from the basketball philosopher Bob Knight. Now, for the ones of you that don't know who he is, he was a very, very accomplished and famous, in a way, infamous at times, coach of Indiana University basketball. And for all of you Bob Knight fans here, I'll tell you, I learned lots of important lessons from life from the 1 credit hour coaching of basketball that I signed up for as a swimmer. Would never touch a basketball. It was a lab and it was a lecture. And so many great stories came from the lecture. Terrible at the lab, would cut to the back of the line all the time. One day he said, I interview my student managers, mind you, 40 to 70 hours a week, unpaid job. But a lot of these young men wanted to be student managers for the team. And he said, the one test that I take at the end of the interview, I say to them, I'll walk you to your car. Half of these young men would put the keys back in their pocket and say, oh, sir, I took the bus, actually. Or some of them would say, oh, I drove very far away. I parked far away. You don't want to. The reason he did that, and this is a telling sign back to artifacts speak important things about you. He said, I didn't care what the brand and year of their car was, but I wanted to see how well kept the car was, inside and out. Because if these young men are going to spend time taking care of my players and my team, I want to make sure that they pay attention to detail and not spend money on expensive cars, but I expect cars inside and outside to be clean and tidy. If they're a mess, I don't want them around my players and my team. Wow. One other thing he paid attention to was shoes and cleanliness. That, I mean, I get that. You wouldn't go to an interview with dirty shoes, but a lot of these guys did. So what you wear and how it is appropriate to the audience is critical too. And I'll say this, we are in an industry where credibility sometimes, I'm not saying this as a statement, but sometimes the buffer you are, the more you know in the eyes of the audience. Or you may look really strong and good, and you may wear something that's revealing enough to intimidate your audience. You want to stay clear, and we all know that wearing branded clothing or wearing something that would be audience neutral and focusing attention on them and not making our audience feel uncomfortable. And it goes from presentations to webinars to one-on-one to meeting someone at a meeting. These are some of our MBA students kind of strutting their stuff in the hallway. Lots of variation. I'm not saying buy a suit, wear a suit, but it's always your authentic look and whatever makes you feel comfortable in, but also communicates that personal brand of yours. That all is really important. Last time Francis invited me, or ACSM invited me to speak, we did a whole communication thing on virtual presentations and communicating virtually. But I can't touch upon this whole branding thing without talking about what your brand looks like virtually online. So a couple of, Shane Snow on LinkedIn has great resources on how not to look totally awful on your video calls. And he does tutorials that say, you know, hanging pieces of plants and backgrounds that are distracting, and the window being behind you versus in front of you, like it is in mine, or weird objects will create that confusion too. And then there's Dave Pont, who actually does lighting and videotaping for a lot of courses and a lot of virtual sites. For me, I literally have a expandable computer holder on a bucket. Yes, it is there, but I've placed this computer in front of a camera so I have good lighting, and I have invested in a good camera, a Logitech Brio, but that's for a different presentation again. But your credibility and your personal brand and presence will come across in some of the logistics of all of this. So far we've talked a little bit about our nonverbals, what visually, how you communicate your brand. And now I want to shift gears and talk a little bit about how you sound. And then this is another true story. This was a LinkedIn course from many years back, actually, when LinkedIn Learning was still lynda.com. And I don't know if you can read this. I'll put on my glasses and read this to you. This person gave me a high rating, but my content manager said this is the most backward piece of feedback I've heard. This author said, as a rule, I don't usually benefit from listening and watching women speakers. Don't tell me that. Most often, males are easier to listen to as they get right to the point without what I refer to as distracting baby talk whenever they wish to interject personal thought and emotion. This particular author was informative and easy to follow along with. I use this as making a point to say how important how you sound is and how important it is for you to get feedback on how you sound. Many of us pick up verbal tics, either asking questions at the end of a sentence, that's called uptalk. I mean, I hear people on the radio interviews do that quite a lot, and you wonder if they believe in what they say. But it's something that is colloquial, it's usual. Does it refer to your audience? Or someone may have fillers and say, right, so next, and then we have all the fillers. But how you sound, the vocalics of how you present your brand, your intonation, your volume or volume changes, your inflection or your pitch of your voice. Many of us give instructions. How I teach a cycling class is a very different vocal interplay of when I actually speak. My husband would disagree. He would say that I talk too loud the whole time, and I try to mind that, especially when we're in closed spaces. The pauses that you use, pausing actually, there's a lot of research to show that you allow the person listening to listen and process, and that silence is an important part of conversations too. That's really critical. Emphasizing certain words, minding the rate of your speaking, changing that, and avoiding fillers. I have fillers there because it's quite distracting to listen to people with fillers. I'm not going to lie, the intonation, what we call uptalk, where there's questions at the end of the sentence, younger generations, and I adopt them all in our courses and have to, on the academic side, to break them. I actually don't ask them to stop doing it, but I ask them to have a dial where they can turn it down or turn it up. And this is a true story too. One of my daughter's high school teachers, I think it was freshman year, would speak like this, and this was really important or popular when the Kardashians started coming out. She had a honors level English teacher that sounded like Kim Kardashian. In fact, the first time I spoke to her on the phone, I said to my husband, Kim Kardashian is the English teacher from Alina. I can't believe it. He was laughing. How do you know if you do this? How do you know how you come across? Well, here are 3 tools that you can use. One tool that I absolutely love, they've started charging for it, is called ORI. These are all artificial intelligence tools that are very useful, and I think we can send this out to our learners as well. Another one is an app, a $4.99 app, that if you tend to do a lot of fillers, like so, it will actually give you a grade when you record your 2-minute pitch. So this is all, remember, so you can record the tell me a little bit about you. And finally, a new app that I am completely in love with and I use all the time in my courses is called Yoodly, YOODLI.ai. Yoodly AI is where you find it. So Ori gives you vocal feedback, and so does Like So, but Yoodly, you get on and you record a video. So they will give you feedback on eye contact. They'll give you feedback on your inclusive words. So if you say you guys all the time, it's going to bust you on that and tell you not to do it. It will give you the fillers. It will give you energy and pace. But when students and executives say to me, how do I fix that? I say, you can't just fix it every time you speak to a client or a prospect. You have to go to practice in between the games. You have to get feedback from artificial intelligence and have an opportunity to make it better. This is really, really, really important. So as we proceed with that, one other thing that I will say, and honestly, yes, full disclosure, I do author for LinkedIn, but there's so many great resources. This is another course called Digital Body Language. All of this does influence how we communicate in writing as well. So what we put online, what we put on our social media posts, how we write, what tone of voice we use for those, how we write emails. This is a fantastic course that I highly recommend you check out because she has all the nuggets, and all of these are important. Remember, we forget the visual, all the nonverbals go away. I guess we communicate nonverbals with emojis. Sometimes we do too many of those. We do talk about tone as we speak, and we do talk about the words that we use. So that's really an important resource too, as well as we communicate our brand. I wanted you now to take out a notepad or a piece of paper and think of the 4 common questions that maybe you have a 5th one that you may be asked. One is, tell me a little bit about you, and you may get this virtually or at a conference. Tell me about your research. We definitely hear this a lot. Tell me about your business, or tell me about your services. Could you, in 2 minutes, 2 minutes, friends, is, let me see, 3 minutes is about 500 words, 250, so about 300 words. I don't ask you to write something that you memorize, but you want to come up with enough of a paragraph of what you do and what you're interested in. Now, remember, not what you do now, what got you into this field. So tell me a little bit about you. You can start by saying, well, I ended up in this field from this. Don't go too far, but that's about how much time this should take you. Now, what you need to think about, the 5 tips that we were talking about, here are the questions that you need to think about your audience. Who is it who is asking? And what information, what knowledge level do they have and not? So you're not trying to impress someone by speaking over their heads. You're going to completely lose them in that conversation. But if you're talking to someone who is familiar with the PhD program you graduated from, or the type of research that you do, go ahead and do some of that specifics. How will they find value in what you say and what you offer? So in a way, what's in it for them to learn more about this? And why should they care? Why is it important? So how can you connect with them, what you say to them? So you can say, so for example, I don't know if you ever go to a gym. So remember, it's not a monologue, there's a back and forth. So you can say, if someone says, how come you got into the fitness business? So I can say, many years back, I was inspired. Exercise is transformational. We have this business. It's a boutique business in Bloomington, Indiana. If you go to a gym, you kind of know, or if you don't, the struggle that we have by feeling better, feeling healthier when we are more active. And then I may always close that conversation with an open-ended question. Tell me a little bit about you. So I may switch it around that same conversation and say, have you been a regular exerciser in the past, or is that something you don't do as often? Remember, we're sort of the people that people maybe in social circles outside of our industry dislike, because we like being active and we like focusing on health, and others may have a hard time with that. In fact, a majority of the population does. So we've got to really tone it down and not be intimidating in this way. So for the sake of time, I'm looking to see, I know we've got a couple more minutes because we want to open it up to questions. Think about, pick one of these questions, and then I want you to analyze your audience with the 5 reflections on the right. Who is it? Think of one specific audience and see if you can come up with a 200-word or 2-minute response of talking about yourself. 150, I would say 150 per minute. I would say 300-word response. Are you capturing all this? Especially if you're going to a meeting. Whenever I attend a meeting or something that's really important, I always see who is coming to that, because I'm always thinking who my audience is and how I want to communicate with them. In this case, this young gentleman is at a conference, ACSM conference, and someone says, tell me a little bit about you. So the whole point of pulling together your brand, your presence, is your superpower, as I said, your invisible cloak that you have, is always thinking of connecting it specifically with your personal brand. This is critical and really important as well. If you want to hear or see more about this, as Francis said, I'm on LinkedIn. Please connect. Let me know. I do respond to all of the messages that I get, and if you are interested in some of these courses and we are connected, we could do that too. I have one more takeaway, and I guess that's my way of getting on the networking side, getting our friends to connect. We can cut the PowerPoint and then send some of those resources out. But Francis, I'm ready for you to field some questions.
Absolutely. So there's a couple questions that are coming in. but I'm going to go with, I have my own personal questions for you. First, being a little selfish.
You're going to cut in line. Go ahead.
That's right. That's right. I get the power of the cutting in line on this one. So there was a really interesting session at ASAE, and ASAE is a session is an organization that's for association executives. And so one of the things that you talked about was networking, and where they found networking the most impactful was going between sessions, which is funny because you go to annual, you go to summit, you run into people, and you be able to talk to folks. And so I have two questions for you in terms of personal interest. So one of them is, when you're networking with somebody, what's the best way to stand in front of, to talking to somebody? Do you stand to the side? Do you stand like a 45-degree angle, or do you stand right in front? And want to kind of walk through that, because I've always kind of ended up going to the side a little bit, like a 3/4 view. And so when we talk, so you're not directly face to face, but you're kind of like talking sideways. I felt more comfortable doing that, and I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
First of all, it's a very valid question. And again, I'm talking about LinkedIn, but I have a whole course on that. Is designing is striking up a meaningful conversation, and it has to do with, how do you approach people? What do you have to look for? A lot of times you don't want to be annoying, you don't want to be intrusive. So first thing I would say, before going up to someone, look and see if they're open. You know what I mean? If you see them like this, you're not going to go in front of them and say, hey, nice to meet you. So you have to sort of survey the environment too. And by the way, that course also talks about famous people. How do you approach, if you see someone, have you ever seen the MasterCard ad where this Mary J. Blige moves into the elevator, and this woman's like, I know her albums. I know where she got her Grammys. I was there. And then she doesn't have one thing to say, because we all get starstruck and we don't say anything. So I talk about surveying and making sure the person is available. Number one, make eye contact and just kind of give a nod. And then make a comment that's content specific. Don't kid it in with, nice to meet you. You sort of say, the conference is really rocking, or I just came out of a great session, or make a comment that's context specific. Don't say, I eat vegetables every day. That's the awkward. And we know people that say awkward things, and you wonder, and so striking up that conversation first then gives you enough data, eye contact, openness, where the person is. They may be sitting. You want to sit as well. You don't want to stand over them and say, nice to meet you. They may be turned. So it depends on the space. It depends on the context. I also tend to say, in these hallway moments, place yourself so you are not distracted by everything that's going on. Because if you can't tell, I'm an extrovert, so I always get too many visual, I would say, triggers where I may say, oh, I know this person. Oh, I know who this is. So if I want to have a good conversation with you, I'll turn myself so I look at you and the wall behind you too. So for me, that positioning works best. So I would say depending on the person is, make sure it's safe and okay to approach, be at their level. If they're standing, leaning, sitting, on a bar stool or somewhere, and of course keep distance that's comfortable, and then make a context related comment as your introduction.
That's awesome. I got one more for you, and then for the audience, please add in your questions into the chat so we can kind of follow along and be able to answer them directly with Tatiana.
The other one is, just want to hear the stories.
Oh yes, that's right. So the other one I got for you is, and especially for a rising professional, is how do you deal with imposter syndrome? Because there are times when you talk to somebody and you feel intimidated, whether you're going on a job interview or whether you're at a conference and they're like, you've published a lot and you're like, oh gosh, I see them all the time. I don't even know what to do. I don't know what to say. How do you deal with that in terms of when you're introducing yourself and networking? How do you deal with imposter syndrome?
So imposter syndrome is a lot about how we feel, and we don't feel adequate enough, or we don't know enough, or we're too young, or we're too new, or we're too not have been in the business in enough times. And the reality is that when you and I are talking, I've got to get it out of my head and think about you and what you need and how I can be interesting in the conversation or helpful. So if I know who you are at a conference and I approach you, I may go open and say, first disclosure, I'm a super fan. I've read all of your papers. Know who the person is that you're talking to, but be informed. You don't want to go next to a presenter that just spoke and say, what do you do? I mean, and if you were just in your session, you may say that was again, make a content relevant comment that is about them, or it is about the common specific context that you are in. I have to say that the imposter syndrome may be there, and it comes and goes in our lives because of how we change. So you may be crushing it in your job and you move to something else and you don't know anything. You know that feeling where it takes a while and you think, what the heck did I do? You hit imposter syndrome again and again. So number one, know that it's very common. Number two, get as much information and educate yourself to feel more prepared and be prepared. You either want to make a comment that's an educated comment, or you want to make a compliment at times. In those sessions, you may say, that was an incredible presentation. Thank you so much. Tell me about your research in this. So again, ask an open-ended question versus, hi, my name is. You can do that a little later because you want to make that first impression first.
Awesome. There's one of the questions was coming from Leonardo, is that is there going to be any recordings or a handout? I know we're sending out the recording. So do you have any handouts for them, Tatiana?
I don't have, maybe I can, I've written this exercise out, and so a lot of the resources, I talked about a book and a couple of courses, and those would be in the visuals of the recording. And maybe the Power 25, I can write it up and you can send it out as a party favor. The Power 25 is a networking, very specific strategy. Francis and I were talking about the old days of leaving conferences way before smartphones, where I would open my laptop and I would have the list like on a napkin of the people that I wanted to follow up with, and I would write my email specifically. So when I would go home, I would just communicate by email, which was definitely in the old days the only way we had to connect. But if you, as a resource for Leonardo who is asking, I give you, and I'll put this in writing so you can actually use it, what I call the Power 25. Think about 5 categories or buckets of your professional life where you need to be networking. So maybe one is if you're a student or you have contacts with your university, maybe make that one bucket. Maybe make a bucket the current people that you work with on a regular basis, or maybe another bucket could be professional friends from past jobs and past experiences. Maybe another bucket would be professional acquaintances, or ACSM, or any other people you've met in conferences. So you can see how I'm talking about these, I don't want to say silos, but I talk to them as being buckets. And then write the names of 5 important people, 5 people that having a relationship with them increases your credibility, either because it gives you additional information, either because it networks you where you can actually pivot by getting to know some other people that they may know, any of those people that are key members of your network. And then this is what I learned from a former student who is in LA in the music industry, which is so incredibly network specific. He would have this set up, and for the ones of you that are Excel geeks, he would every 30 days, he would make sure that he would have one touch point with this person. And if he didn't, it would turn red or yellow or green, like this is coming up. So he could visually look at an Excel spreadsheet and say, am I feeding, or am I nurturing my network at this point? So 5 times 5 is 25. He actually did it to 100. He had the Power 100, which I thought was insane, but he fed his network, and I can tell you, he got everything done through people. If he didn't know somebody, somebody would know somebody to introduce him. And by the way, that's what's happening in social media, in some of the social media platforms that are professionally focused right now. This is where you can get to know people through people. You can make a comment on something they post. You can send them an email on something that, an article that you read that reminded you of them. You can say, I saw that you attended that conference. That's fantastic. I wish I was there. make a relevant, or you can say, hey, how's it going? I want to touch base. Maybe you prioritize those people and there's some that you want to touch base with. And I'll give you a simple example. I teach this to my students, obviously not very well at times, because I have freshmen from last year, over a year and a half ago, that I haven't heard from in 2.5 semesters, that reach out and say, Professor, I hope you had a great summer. I am applying for this overseas studies. And my response is, if I haven't heard from them in a year, I did a terrible job teaching you how to network, even though I teach business presentations. And there's probably another faculty who could better speak to your goals and your accomplishments in the last year. That's not me, because you haven't kept in touch. And they shamefully put their heads down on email and say, you're right, I'm sorry. And I don't mean to be mean about this, but it's really important that if you're listening to this and you have a network, Francis and I were probably dating ourselves, but we've done this for years in different ways. You must, if you want to pay attention to building your brand, it's through people and building your credibility. You must nurture your network too. And that's the giveaway. Leonardo, I hope that it's a helpful one for you.
Oh my gosh, I can't even tell you how many times people just forget to work their Rolodex, and that's, I'm aging myself with saying Rolodex.
Yes, that's right, the Rolodex.
Sorry. So there's about 4 or 5 questions are coming in. Thank you for sending these in. So if you're talking to a prospective client and they seem disinterested, is there a point you just go cut them off and then just let them be, or how do you, or is there a kind of like a prompt to kind of pursue that conversation? How do you deal with that?
Is this, and I'll ask for a clarifying question. Are we at a conference where we're chatting and it's not going anywhere, or is it a client at the gym and it's a prospective client? Which context is it, Francis?
Look, in the way it's written out, it looks like a prospective client.
Prospective client, sure. It's not a right or a strong fit all the time. You want to take the high road. You want to be very polite, very diplomatic. And if you and I were meeting at the gym and I was telling you about what I do and I teach, this is important, and you're sort of looking around, you can say, you know what, I'm sure that I don't want to take up too much of your time. I want to, you're here probably to get a workout, so I don't want to take too much of that. Here's my card, or here's where you can reach me if you find value, or maybe you have family members that you think would be interested. So it's okay to take the high road. It's okay not to take it personally. We have people drop their memberships in our studio a lot. Not a lot, but it does happen. And we try not to take it personally, of walking away from a conversation. People have all sorts of other reasons. The person may be disinterested because their kid is sick, or they missed the bus today, or they're frustrated, or they're dealing with something at work. It's not you, but find a tactful way to make it about them. I'm sure I don't want to take up much of your time. You may want to be finishing your workout. It was great to talk to you. If you need to reach me, and go from there. So practice exiting in some of these ways, so you don't feel bad and it doesn't become awkward with that prospective client.
Awesome.
Thanks for your
this
question.
One is, here's the next one. It was we heard this from employers, but this is a parent asking for it during the pandemic. It was kind of difficult for their teenager, and to really kind of develop their social skills. And so she's been asked, how do you start a conversation? Is there a resource for teenagers, or kind of like, what are your thoughts there?
So this is a parent asking for their teenager. Our kids, our daughter was sophomore year spent the whole sophomore year in college in front of a screen. And our son, his senior year in high school in the same setting. I can agree, a generation that's even more used to texting, like never make a phone call. I mean, not even to order a pizza. It's very difficult for them. So as a parent, I would encourage you to model it first. And we raised our kids from an early age, giving them money and say, go to the store and get this. So you go in, I have to make this call. Can you do that? Of getting them to feel more comfortable. And again, I'm not saying that our kids were comfortable with that. It wasn't easy. But modeling it first, of you striking up a conversation first, so they're seeing how it's not difficult. And also having them practice it. It sounds like it's a teenager, so maybe they're in school, of having them have very specific reasons to talk to their teachers. So maybe they can say, I did this assignment and I found this very interesting. They don't always have to ask questions. I think teenagers maybe at times may have a hard time asking for things. That's a whole other presentation. But just making statements and comments, it makes it a lot easier to get them to practice. Again, it goes back to they need to practice more. So model it and give them good ideas of when they can do it. And then, introduce them if you're in a setting and have them engage and really coach them in what to say. I completely agree. It's very difficult for them. And I think it will be even more as years pass, and then they come to college and they have to practice these skills and they have a hard time with that.
Awesome. Here's the next one. This is a really good one. So you mentioned compelling and memorable messages. Are there specific words or terms you would integrate? Of course, there could be situationally specific, but it was a great presentation.
Depends on the audience of what would be compelling and memorable to them, right? So when people say to me in the business setting, how did you get here? And I say, I'm an academic immigrant. In a way, I came to this country with nothing, or my focus was I immigrated because of learning and education. And that's really important to me. And people tell me that that's a memorable word. So find what is your tagline, what it is that makes what you say memorable to others, and test it, because every audience will be a little bit different. The compelling and memorable also goes with the specific examples. So whenever you're speaking on your tell me a little bit about you, make sure that you have an example that no one else can copy. So if you say, I went to Illinois University, I have an exercise physiology degree, and I'm a certified blah, blah, blah. There'll be 10 people that can have that same message, or I'm from X place. But when you say, I'm from a small town that has one crossing light, or all of a sudden you're painting a picture that's so vivid that gives that person the image of, oh, wow, you came into the big city from a small place. So think of vivid images and think of painting the picture or telling a story that's unique and authentic to you, like my student with the grandpa in the tractor in Iowa.
I was going to say the same thing, especially in interviews, that you end up remembering stories that, and what you learn from it, I think are really helpful.
Yes.
So you're not remembering. There's I used to do those interviews where you just remember a list and you're like, I forgot the thing on the list, and you just get, you just kind of get in a tailspin. So if you can think about 2 or 3 stories, but those are always going to they're really compelling.
Or Francis, every part of your resume, every one of your experiences should have a story and a lesson learned and something they took away. Every one of them, you need to mine all of those, because you're not going to sit in an interview and say, tell me about you. The last thing you should do, go through the that's such a waste. Again, that's of your time. Now, tell the story. See, as you want to, what drives you, what wakes you up in the morning, wakes you up at night. Some of those things that, again, compact way, don't go on forever.
So this one's going to cut to you now, is because our discussion in the green room is dealing with imposters on social media. So how do you make an impression when they look the part, and they when they're looking on social? How do you, as a exercise professional, deal with those individuals, and especially with your clients, bring up questions that they could be influencers, could be some really asinine things. So how do you deal with it?
If you spend a lot of time operating, a lot of time thinking through of making it perfect,
I'm cutting out the audio. Can't hear you, Tatiana. Tatiana, can you hear me? Oh. I think we lost your audio. Just give us one more second. Looks like Tatiana's trying to log back in. Yeah, the audio is still off, Tatiana. If you might be able to do that, there's one more question for you. You may have to dial in.
Here we go.
Oh, there it goes. We're good.
I got it. Something changed.
You're
The
good.
go to webinar gods came to savior. Tell me your question again. I lost it in trying to troubleshoot. Oh, imposter syndrome.
So how do you deal with the people on social media who just say things or just like, no, that's not right, and so now you have to interact with your clients and like, look, like let's break this down a little bit.
Okay, not because it's the app, be real, but I recommend the best approach you have for this is be real, be authentic, tell the truth, don't get competitive and combative with anyone else, walk the path and stay, I'm sure everyone here, personal trainer, fitness instructor, physiologist, or practitioner has their key audience. That's who you're trying to approach. Find out what it is that they need. Sadly, I would say a lot of the influencers are attracting that audience, but that does not have sustainability. That's going to be the next best thing. And trust me, I'm 55. If you're banking on the way you look and being that fit, and that's going to change. You're going to get older. That brand is going to go away. So you've got to find on something else to create your brand around. And we're at ACSM. It's education, it's information, it's critical thinking, and it's health and well-being, period. So that's my advice. It's probably not the formula that is exact, but it keeps changing.
Oh yeah, I think my big thing is just being able to use simpler language to be able to connect, and then being able to understand what they're looking for and looking for that level of just kind of like, do you understand what I'm saying, versus just like kind of
know your audience. Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So
and
last
social media,
go ahead,
see what works. What's that?
Oh, sorry. I was just saying there's one more question for you.
Yeah.
So last one from Devona is, I'm a group fitness instructor and CPR instructor. I conduct most of my business virtually. I also relocated right before the pandemic. I'm really having trouble networking and connecting with other people in my community. Any advice?
It sounds like you've moved geographically, so you've moved your cheese all the way around. So COVID has brought you inside, and then you have not been able to connect. Is there any way, in a safe way, you could offer fitness classes outside? So maybe tasters, because when we were closed for 18 months, and I'll say this again, 18 months is a long time to pay rent and not have people coming through your doors. That's very painful. But we did outdoor workouts. You can get spry bands. You can get people together. Fitness and exercise are about community. And it's hard to create that community virtually if people don't know who one another is. So try to figure out ways that you can gather people outdoors safely, and then you can give them the option. In our studio, we do live and streamed at the same time. Because of COVID, we learned so well how to do online, and now we do both of them at the same time, and people have access to recordings. So do you record some of your sessions? So if they become members of your community, do they get those sessions? And that gets into a whole other technical ball of jargon. But I would say go out, meet people, go to the farmer's market, go out and spend time at parks, gather a small group where you can exercise outside, and then people see it, and then they connect. And network as much as you can. I would really highly recommend a social media app like LinkedIn, where you can connect with other professionals in your area and with your own credentials. It's tough. I'm not saying it's not. Thank you for your question.
Absolutely, and I think that's it. Thanks for all those questions. We are right at the top of the hour, so we want to be mindful of your time. But this has been wonderful, Tatiana. I think we've learned so much we can do to kind of improve our level of communications, eye contact, body position, things like that. I love it personally, so I want to continue these conversations as we continue to go, and especially maybe some more nuanced questions like how do I schedule for an interview? How do I do that? How do I go through it?
Absolutely, we can do a whole other lunchtime seminar. I do want to say to the viewers that are here and the ones that are going to see the webinar next, I don't for 1 minute take your time for granted. And I really, really appreciate you setting this up on your schedule and joining us. I love education. I believe in the vision and the mission of the American College of Sports Medicine. Thanks for being part of this great organization, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank
Bye.
you. Take care. Bye-bye.